Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life Science Rundown, the podcast where we discuss current regulatory complexities facing the life science industry and explore innovative ways to overcome those challenges. I am your host, Nicholas Catman, President and CEO of the FDA Group. Before we get started, here's a quick word about who we are. The FDA Group is a technology and consulting firm that helps life science companies in the areas of regulatory submissions, audit projects, mock inspections, staff augmentation, and remediation. So if you ever find yourself in need, just head over to the fdagroup.com to check us out and get in touch. So today we're going to be talking about why do so many CAPA systems fail to drive improvement, and what does it take to rebuild them into tools that strengthen compliance, efficiency, and team ownership? And on with me is a guest today in order to help find an answer to this question and many others is Dan Eagles. Hey, Dan, how are you doing?
Hi, Nicholas. Good to see you. How have you
Likewise.
been?
Absolutely. Well, before we jump in, would you kindly introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Dan Eagles, currently the Vice President of Quality Assurance for Neurosignal. Throughout my career, I've been in medical device even before I graduated college. Found it very inspiring and have held hit roles in manufacturing, in R&D, and for probably about the past 23 years, I've been in quality assurance with different roles of different levels of responsibility.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Well, without further ado, let's jump right into it. So, Dan, at a high level, why do CAPA systems so often become a check in the box exercise instead of a driver of real improvement?
I think, kind of in my experience, it's really two areas. It's process and stewardship. And I think as we go through and talk about the different areas, um, the process and that stewardship are very much entwined, and not only with CAPA, but other elements of the quality management system.
Mhm. What would you say are some of the most common warning signs that a CAPA system is technically compliant but functionally broken?
The big thing I've seen over the years is that your CAPA system and your metrics may be timely. People are hitting their marks, but you're seeing a high level of repeat offenders. And part of as we get into digging into this is your metrics are very important. If you're seeing that an executed CAPA is failing again for the same thing,
Hmm.
it wasn't a successful CAPA.
Right. How much would you say of CAPA failure is due to a flawed process design versus organizational behavior and culture?
Well, some of it is process design. Um, if you look at CAPA, it's really it's very simple. You have an issue, you create a problem statement, you do an investigation, create an implementation plan, and a verification of effectiveness plan. It's very simple. Well, it's very simple, but it's not necessarily easy.
Mm.
And so, really, where you have to dig in is at the very beginning. Um, some of the CAPAs that I've seen, and probably some that I've written myself, had a poorly worded problem description.
Mm.
And so, if you're not clearly defining the problem, you're going to have a lot of kind of ambiguity as you're going into investigation. So, I think the first thing is to develop a system within your CAPA program to train your CAPA owners how to do a good problem statement. And this not only applies to CAPA, and I'm going to use CAPA in a very broad sense of not only CAPA, the four-letter word we all love and know, but also NCRs, because NCRs a lot of time will feed into CAPA. So you're getting a lot of bang for the buck if you train your CAPA owners to be good problem statement writers.
Hmm. Well, speaking of the beginning, let's talk about root cause analysis. So, where would you say companies most frequently go wrong with root cause analysis, and how does that undermine the entire CAPA life cycle?
I think as I was going through the preparation, I was thinking, how does this happen? We've got a bunch of Six Sigma tools out there. We've got a lot of root cause analysis, content on the internet, but it's human nature. If you look, humans are prone to jump to conclusions. And a lot of times you look at it, oh, that's easy. This is going to be this is going to be my corrective action. And you kind of you back engineer your root cause analysis to match what you want your implementation plan to be.
Okay.
There was a very good training I had back at J&J where during the Six Sigma program, where they looked at forklift drivers. So there's,
Hmm.
these three seasoned forklift drivers and these two new forklift drivers. And, the folks running the warehouse, hey, we're having a lot of damage with respect to forklift handling. And so, of course, let's do a CAPA. And they found out that during their investigation that the three tenured forklift drivers had this training, and the new folks hadn't. So, oh, that's it. They haven't had the training. Well, they'd all been trained on how to handle a forklift. They were all licensed to do it. So they went ahead, gave the new forklift drivers the training, and hey, this is going to be great. They did their effectiveness, and guess what? The rate of damage was exactly the same, and in some cases, it actually went up.
Right.
Okay, what does that tell us? Okay, it tells us that we also need to look at metrics and what are we trying, from the problem statement, what are we trying to solve? And a lot of times during your investigation, you really have to tease these things out. Maybe, if we looked at the rate of damage with respect to how many pallets that each of the forklift drivers carried during the day, maybe the three, old timers were, not quite as aggressive as the two new ones. And if the two new ones had a lot higher, quantity of movement, maybe their rates of damage were actually lower, percentage wise than the new ones.
Mm.
And so it was a very good example of, hey, we see an obvious gap. That's the issue. That's the root cause of our problem. We're just going to apply a solution to that, and everything's going to be great.
Mm.
Um, and sometimes, as you go through your CAPA, understanding what your problem is, doing a thorough investigation, but also looking at your metrics, looking at, okay, how am I going to prove this CAPA is effective? And, am I looking at the right metrics? The A lot of times, people kind of looked, and I think at least in my own experience, things have kind of shifted to, okay, we're going to sit on this for 3 months in VOE and see if it recurs again. So it's a very kind of retrospective, waiting for something to happen
Mm.
kind of philosophy. Whereas maybe you could do a process validation instead, and prove that the forklift drivers are capable, are handling the pallets the correct way.
Mm.
They fully understand the training. They went through training. They have a quiz. They demonstrate something. And as I wrap that validation up, now I've wrapped up my VOE, and I have objective evidence that the CAPA was indeed effective.
Yeah. Well, I know retrain the operator is a favorite CAPA for issues that are found,
Yes.
right? So I would encourage people to give that a second thought before you write that down on all your CAPAs. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. That's funny because part of the kind of the philosophy I have is that we'll do training within the NCR. And
hmm,
so, part of your NCR metrics are to track, are you having issues? I've got a, particular issue, sometimes with cable crimping. And so, worked with the operations team to make sure we have cable crimping and the folks are trained. And, but if we start to continue to see that, okay, then we have evidence and enough compelling data to then go into a car and then determine, hey, do we really need to do a cap on this?
hmm,
So and I think we can, as we go into kind of the changes that people can make, I want to discuss kind of a car versus a car as a precursor to a CAPA.
Okay. Well, how do poorly written CAPAs create downstream problems during audits, inspections, or regulatory submissions?
Oftentimes, the corrections or the corrective actions are actually corrections.
Hmm.
And so, again, human nature, we do want to fix things. Medical device, we want to make sure that patient safety is not compromised. And so, really making sure that when you're assigning a corrective action, it is indeed that action that's going to prevent recurrence. Um, Correction is something that it simply fixes the problem that's at hand. For example, a record that doesn't have maybe some missing fields or some missing data. And so, if you do not have a well laid out and simple to operate CAPA system, as an auditor myself, I can go in and, start asking, kind of in the investigation and corrective action phase, implementation phases. Okay, well, what did this solve? Why did you do this? How does this tie in with your risk management? Um, CAPA and risk management are really hand in hand. As we work on these CAPAs, uh, we need to keep risk management in mind because we want to keep our risks as low as possible.
Well, let's talk about the role of leadership. What would you say is what do they do intentionally or unintentionally as it pertains to reinforcing weak CAPA behaviors?
Uh, Good. I'm going to turn this around a little bit, and I think talk a little bit more about good leadership.
Okay.
Good CAPA programs at the leadership level have support across all functional groups. Um, those leaders do understand that CAPA is built into medical device DNA, and that it's not just a compliance exercise, it's a project that also drives continuous improvement. So if you switch your mindset and really think about CAPA rather than, hey, I want to check the box for an auditor, but hey, I can take care of these problems that have been aggravating us. This is better operationally. It's better from a compliance perspective. Um, you look at from a manufacturing standpoint, it keeps lines up and running. So there's a lot of benefits to have that buy-in across all the leadership functional groups. Uh, on the downside, if you don't have that support, the CAPA becomes a hot potato.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes you get a lot of people that are CAPA experts and say, oh, we don't need CAPA. This is not a CAPA. We don't need this. But I think if you press them and ask them exactly what a CAPA is, they're probably not going to give you a real good definition of it.
Hmm.
Um, and it's the attitude of, my department's already stretched. We don't need the extra work. If you do look at it that way, you're not going to improve. And that's not to say that, yeah, CAPA is a lot of work. It can take up a significant amount of time. But if you've ever been on a recall, that kind
Oh,
of takes up a lot of time too, and a
yeah.
lot of money.
Right.
So, if you CAPA is a bridge, between our product before it's left the dock and our product that's out in the field. And so again, it's a very powerful tool that you keep it under your umbrella at headquarters, and you can keep that discrepant product from hitting the market.
Let's say a company decides that they need to redesign their CAPA system. How do they balance regulatory rigor with operational efficiency instead of trading one for the other?
Look at it as a project. I think you need uh, a CAPA leader, or look at it as a quality plan and say, hey, we're going to revamp our quality, or we're going to revamp our CAPA process. The person leading that process needs to understand CAPA. Uh, that person needs to pull in team members from all cross-functional groups. And probably the first thing I would do is go through some CAPA training. What is CAPA? What are the benefits? What are the downsides of it? What does CAPA mean to FDA and ISO?
Mm.
If you look at warning letters, what are some of the heavy hitters every single time? It's always CAPA.
Mm.
It's always training. It's always complaint management. So we know that the regulatory bodies are going to be looking at us. We also know that we have an opportunity to create a program within our company that helps us solve problems in a very rigorized and standardized manner. I would then take the CAPA process, which I described earlier, and really try to keep it simple. One of the best things I've seen done is standardize all the necessary forms that you need. So whomever the CAPA owner is, they can use these forms. So nobody's making anything up on the fly. Very good training with your problem statement. So it has to find the who, what, where, and why, and how elements. For example, if you look at your five whys, you have a template to help lay out your five whys. You have templates for fishbone. I can never remember all the elements of fishbone. I get man, materials, process, environment, and then I kind of, I'm like, okay, what's the next one? But if I can go to a release document in my QMS and have my fishbone, I don't have to remember them. I have them
Mm.
right there. I know
Mm-hmm.
how to fill out the form. I know how to use it. So it's driving that consistency within the process. The
Mm.
second thing is also train people to be able to mentor. Um, and so that mentorship comes at each one of those phases to say, okay, yes, you've done the investigation, you've laid out your implementation plans, you've got your VOE plan. This looks really good. And or if, hey, we think some things are a little bit loose here, let's tighten them up. And then, making sure, again, very important, your problem statement is solid.
Mm.
There was somebody I used to work with, and this person just had an absolute knack for a problem statement.
Mm.
And so his CAPAs were very brief. The investigation wasn't long-winded, very succinct
Mm.
implementation plans, and it was a thing of beauty.
Mm.
um, and so I wish I could tap into that talent. But again, great problem statements. And as your CAPA owners grow, and I think in a lot of organizations, the CAPA owners tend to be the same people. Um, you kind of develop, you develop their leadership. You develop them also into technical experts, and you develop them into mentors. And so they can then pass that information to members of their team so they can actually delegate some of these tasks. And so by doing that, you're continuing to spread and educate CAPA throughout the entire company culture.
Mm. Excellent. Well, what metrics or signals should companies track to know whether their CAPA system is driving improvement and not just closure?
Closure is always important. Are we on time? It's a high level metric that shows, okay, are we resource constrained? Are we task saturated? But one, I think the most important metric is, are the VOEs effective?
Mm.
And so are we, once a cap is closed, we continue to track those particular errors or issues to see if they've popped up again. And to be diligent about that. And you may get some, maybe some non-conformances in the general area, but you have to be, you have to be kind of objective to make sure it's not the exact same thing. Um, I had read I think it was a white paper of a particular medical device where um, there was a certain torque involved, and this thing was falling apart, and the engineer said, okay, well, all I need to do is to make sure there's a torque standard on the floor. The operator will make sure their torque wrench is working right, and we'll go ahead and that's the root cause. Well, it wasn't. Standard was put in place. Torque wrenches were checked. Things were torqued to the proper value, and the issue still persisted.
Mm,
And so then it was realized, okay, this is not it's not torque. It's we need to take a further look into our manufacturing process.
mm, yeah.
Is there a different way to capture this fastener, not just by torque?
Mm. Well, there's obviously a lot of conversation around technology and AI today. How can some of these CAPA tools help or hurt depending on how they're implemented?
The main thing that I've seen is, again, if you're most of us, I think, are using CAPA in an electronic system.
Hmm.
Make sure that if you can change it because it's clunky, change it. That's why we have a change management program. Uh, Make sure that it's easy for your teams to work in. Um, and it's if you do that, it number one helps the CAPA owner. Number two, it helps the approver. Number three, it's also worth its weight in gold during audit time because
Mm,
you print it out and the or the CAPA is very well laid out, and the auditor can follow it easily. Um, and that kind of goes back to my little my talk about standardization. I give the auditor a full list of my CAPAs, and they'll say, well, I'll take that one, and that one. If the auditor pulls them out and they really have kind of that same look and feel, that it also is a signal that, hey, your company takes CAPA seriously,
mm,
that your CAPA owners are mindful of what they need to do, and you've got a good program. So if you see, something that's not quite right, it's going to pop up a lot easier, and you can address it.
mm,
Um, with respect to AI, personally, I've been using AI to help me write CAPAs and to go through investigations, and a lot of it, where I use it, is to look at my quality procedures and say, okay, where, what am I missing? I've done a good problem statement, and through that, I say, okay, I'm going to have to adjust this and this and this. Um, and so I'll feed that in and say, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Is there anything else? Um, and then when I get the output, I read it, and I'm not going to take it as gospel.
mm,
AI is
hmm,
great,
hmm,
but I if the CAPA says I need to put another muffler bearing on, probably not going to abide by that.
mm,
I think it's a great tool to develop content that, as you develop experience in CAPAs, you can read through and use those pieces that you need.
mm,
Um, and I think we can all sit down and a lot of times type it out because we already have a very good idea of what we want to do. But that typing takes a lot of time. So it is, for me, it is a time saver to generate that content and then really kind of take those pieces that I need. Um, CAPA, or with respect to AI, it could. I have not done this, but it could probably also, look at company data to say, okay, is your CAPA system effective?
hmm.
Um, so that's a little bit down the line. I'm sure there's people already doing that, but I think it has a lot of value for continuous improvement for a company.
Sure. Well, let's say somebody's listening and they've decided I need to rebuild my CAPA system from scratch. What would you say are the first three changes you'd recommend to make it sustainable and inspection ready?
First thing would be to really understand what your CAPA system is doing. So again, gather your team, and then really old school, plot out the workflow for your existing CAPA system.
Hmm.
Um, Note those areas where you're really seeing to have problems. You can take your performance metrics, and if you have a bunch of stuff stuck in investigation and maybe implementation, as you look at your process, that process should bear fruit in terms of why people are getting hung up there. The second is to design your kind of your blue sky system. So again, keep it simple. There's a ton of stuff on the internet, resources on the internet. So I mean the ability to learn about CAPA is never at a better time. We have AI. There's like I said, a ton of resources that you can do to say, hey, am I going to develop this system for a 3,000 person company, or is it going to be for 30 people? Well, FDA, ISO, they lay out exactly what you need in CAPA. So that's your baseline. Use the system to develop itself. And third, make sure that you. I would certainly advocate putting in an electronic system. Back in the day, I used to do CAPAs on paper. It's still the same stuff. It's still the same activity, but make sure that system works. Put it in place, sandbox it, and validate it.
Excellent. Well, this has really been very informative. I really appreciate your time and your insight. Before we close, what would you like to leave the audience with?
CAPA is not a four-letter word. CAPA can really be your friend. I think it's a very powerful tool to be able to improve things in your company. It's been implemented for a reason. It's not only in a medical device, but it's in a lot of other industries. And I would really encourage people to make it work for your system, for the size of your team, and continue to tout it as continuous improvement versus, oh crap, here comes another CAPA. It is, again, it's a powerful tool, and continue to work and influence with your fellow leaders to get that buy-in.
Yep. Awesome. Dan, thank you very much for your insight. For everybody listening, as always, if you find conversations like this valuable, please share it with a colleague or your professional network. Subscribe to get updates of new episodes at thefdagroup.com/podcast, and follow the FDA Group on LinkedIn for industry updates and cutting-edge insights. If you'd like to talk about project or resource needs, just head over to thefdagroup.com to get in touch, or feel free to connect with me personally on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you all in the next rundown.